Okay, so
Okay.
welcome to What a Word is Worth, a space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. This is your host, Marianela Medrano, founder of Palabra Center, where words are given as medicine. After a long hiatus, I was so moved by a person I met at the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that I knew it was time to resume these conversations. So my guest today is someone, even though I just met him, I consider him a brother and someone who is a brilliant mind who speaks from the heart. A Brazilian Zen teacher, writer, psychiatrist, and spiritual activist, Dr. Alcio Braz. Welcome, Alcio.
Thank you very much. I almost beginning to believe that I'm all that. And thank you, Marianela. It was so good to meet you here at Upaya for the Grace program. It was really good because as I may say that we are childhood friends, although we met 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. When I was with John Halifax Roshi at the Himalayas in the Nomads Clinic, I met a Sherpa named Norbu Lama. He was a Sherpa. He worked as one of our guides.
Yeah.
And I was very afraid of heights. And you can imagine that those trails are not only high, but a little bit tricky and treacherous.
Yeah, treacherous.
So I said, Norbu, you are my newest childhood friend. And so you have to give me your hand every bridge that we cross and every trail that is too narrow. Give me your hand, please.
Yeah.
Laughing, but he gave the hand. And
I was going to say, did he do it?
Yeah, he did
Good.
it. And because it's also, it's also a part of their culture too. Men there can walk hand in hand. It's not considered something strange.
Yeah.
So it was very easy for him, and he was not breaking a taboo. For example, if you were there, it would be more difficult because there is a taboo about touching women if you're a man.
Right. That relationship between genders is complex.
Yeah, so you would have to deal with your fear. I don't even know if you have height phobia, but I have. And then you have to give the hand. I don't know to whom, because there were no Sherpa women there. Maybe
I'll go. Maybe I'll go and become the first one.
Maybe, yeah. Who knows? I say you good luck.
So, Alcio, as I said in the intro, we want to engage in conversations with creative minds. And when I met you, I knew I was in front of one. And your talk at Upaya, your Dharma talk was really, really touched me to the core. So when did you realize the power of words? When did you say, okay, I'm going to write down my thoughts? When did you make that transition?
Maybe those are two different questions for me, because the power of words came to me through my father and mother too. But my father was a priest in the native Brazilian, Afro-Brazilian religion, Umbanda. There are two that were separate, Umbanda and Candomblé, but now they're mostly mixed in Brazil. But this is not the topic. But my father was a priest in that religion. And when I was like 5, 6 years old, I mean, maybe even earlier, but I do remember from my 5th year on, he would like embody, or we say in Portuguese we say incorporar. That might be embody, but he would embody those indigenous spirits that were his guides, as we usually say in Portuguese. And then he would put me on his lap, and he would be like seeing people for like I don't know if this word exists in English, consultation, or
like a consultation, a spiritual consultation.
Yeah, and so people would be there talking about their problems. I was sitting on his lap. I didn't understand, of course, much of it, but I could see the effect that the words that those indigenous spirits had on those people who were consulting, because they left the place a lot better. Even if they didn't get a cure for some ailment, but their spirit was like upgraded, if I can say that. So I really began to perceive the power of words in that sense. Of course, he was my father too, so I knew the power of his words upon me as a son, because he was a traditional father. You can imagine, like, I'm 67 years old, so you can imagine 67 years ago in Brazil, we didn't grow up in a liberal environment. So he was a little bit stern, I would say. So his word had power in that sense of obedience. But also I could see the beauty of the words that those spirits brought. And it was very interesting for me. And when I was, it touched my heart. And I always asked my mother when the spirits would be coming again, because sometimes we went to a temple, but sometimes when someone really needed, he would do that at home for a neighbor or someone else. So it was very interesting, because I never understood it. But, I have a characteristic. Though I am a psychiatrist, I don't think that I'm really a scientist, because I'm not much worried about why things work, but I like to see they working. So I never asked myself really, what is this kind of thing, spirits talking through my father? It didn't worry me. I just wanted to be present and to observe this thing. And when I was at school and I began to learn to write and to read, I discovered the whole world through literature. And that was around 7, 8 years old. There is a Brazilian author that now is a little bit canceled, because he was an author of the 50s. So his language sometimes is sexist or has gender issues or racist.
Right.
But he's not in the least a rightist person. But the thing is that the language he used, the power of words, had this. So nowadays, some people are very critical of him. He's dead long years ago. I think that's sort of an exaggeration when you try to erase histories, because that's a historical fact. He wrote like that. So I don't think that erasing it will be useful for the new generation, because this history has to be told to. And you cannot just clean it like, oh, there was no racism in the 50s. No, there was. The lady who was the housekeeper of those children, because it was, he wrote for adults, but he also wrote for children. And the books for children were very famous in Brazil. It was a collection of 12 books. And those books were my world, because I read them and I felt inside the story. And of course, the housekeeper was Black. But that was Brazil. I mean, I didn't need to read to discover that, because I knew people who had Black people working as housekeepers, or babysitters or anything like that. So that's a sort of exaggeration. But anyway, this reading opened me to the idea that I could write too. I don't really know why. But then I began, when I was like 11, 12, I began making journals, diaries, and things like that. And it's so interesting because most of them I still have. And then I can see how we rebuilt our own history throughout time. Because when I read some things, I think, my goodness, I didn't remember it that way. Now, and, you know, for example, when I was like 8 years old, I had a very difficult relationship with my father. I was very hateful of him, very angry at him. But now I think he was a wonderful man. So it's the same person, but 60 years later, I made a complete different evaluation of him. It's interesting, no? Because words have this capacity to, they change. I mean, and you change the narrative, you change the memory, and so you change reality in a sense. But if you don't interrupt me, my tendency is to talk without stopping. My teacher told me that I should not be like that.
Well, what I'm thinking, Alcio, is I'm thinking of Paulo Freire and his idea of words, that we have to know the words so we can understand the world. So it seems like you were giving words at a very early age, and not just words, but also the power of imagination, right? Like this exposure to your father who has this convergence of traditions, right? And that was put at your disposal. So staying with Freire, how was he an influence for you too? Because the more I think about him and other people's proposals from our part of the world, the more I understand Buddhism and the more I see why is an area that speaks to my heart. Was that also your reading?
Not really, because, you know, I was 8 years old when the military coup d'etat happened in Brazil in 1954. I'm from 1956. The military dictatorship began in 1964. And there's a funny story about that I remember now, because it was really on the 1st of April. And so the military changed.
It's April Fool.
Yeah, so they changed history and put it in the March 31st, because they didn't want it to be April 1st, but it was April 1st. Which is very funny. No, not so funny, because the dictatorship was not funny.
Right.
But what happened is that Paulo Freire was censored. I mean, I never met a book by Paulo Freire until after the military dictatorship finished. So when I met Paulo Freire, I was already 33, 34 years old. So he was not really an influence in my younger age. But the fact that my mother told me stories of her childhood, things from the Northeast where Paulo Freire was born, I think that built a very rich imaginary world for me. Because Monteiro Lobato, that author that I said of the 12 books, he had, in those books, he gave a very, I would say, democratic vision with the colors of that time, but he was a very democratic person. And so I think
there was though a lack of awareness that we can see now, because we have been progressing through different paradigms, but he was seeing the world from the paradigm of that time.
And that was another funny thing that happened. Until I went to elementary school, when I went to kindergarten, I was always studied in public schools in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. They were very good. But in kindergarten, it was very funny, because my father at that time was like a union leader. That is why he was arrested immediately when the military dictatorship began. but and he stayed for a year in jail, but he came back home. He didn't die as many died. But at that time, it was just before the dictatorship. I was in a public kindergarten, and the teachers were a little bit afraid of my father because he had some power, political power, and he was a very imposing man. His words were very loaded with authority. So what happens that I have a very intense problem of short sight. I mean, I use glasses for in this distance I can see you because of the screen, but if it's 2 meters from me, I can't see. So at that time it was worse, even worse. So I couldn't do anything at kindergarten. I couldn't imitate the teachers. So they thought I was a little bit retarded and I had some deficiency. And so they did, but they were afraid of telling my father that his son was a deficient boy. So what they did is when it was a time to show the works of the kids, they made my works. So my father never knew what happened. So when I got to elementary school, and I was always falling and getting bruises because I didn't see stairs. And you see, that time was a little bit strange. Nobody examined the eyes of children. And so when I got to elementary school, the children were put in the classroom by height. So I was one of the tallest.
You were very tall.
Yeah. And then someday the teacher met me at the first row and she said, "What are you doing here? You should be at the," but I said, I can't see the blackboard. And you told me to copy the blackboard. She said, "Oh, you have a problem." And then she told my mother. And when I was 7, I went to an ophthalmologist. And then I began seeing the world. So it's very interesting because it was more or less simultaneous. I learned to read and write when I began seeing the world. Up to that point, I was only seeing like Monet all around because everything was colorful, but there was no like precision view. No?
What do you think that what kind of impact did that have in you as a child, your sense of self, your sense of being in interaction with a world that you were not seeing clearly?
I didn't know that I was not seeing. That is interesting. So I never felt it like a problem.
You didn't know.
Yeah, I only discovered it was a problem the first time I put my glasses, and I almost couldn't get out of the office of the ophthalmologist because there were stairs, and I was seeing the stair for the first time, not believing in my intuition or body positioning. So I told my mother, "What's happening? What is this?" She said, "This is the world." And I said, "Oh my God." And so for me, it was not a problem. And on the other hand, well, the only problem is that I felt a little clumsy because I never could do anything right in that sense. That was a problem. But I thought I was clumsy. I said, "Oh my God, I'm not very, I could see, apt with tools or things." But on the other hand, the world was very magical for me. It was full of color, movement. And so the words of the spirits with this colorful world, I think my mind was very open by that.
Oh, that was enriching. So it almost makes sense then that your first area of studies was anthropology, because it was like the continuation, or how did you get to that?
My first area was medicine. And what happened is that I never wanted to be a doctor, but as you know, in Brazil, we have some kind of general examination at the end of high school. And that, depending on the grades, you go to, well, whatever university or faculty you want to go. But it's like an exam. It's not like a curriculum. I never wanted to be a doctor, but something happened at the last moment that I said, I want to be a doctor. And my father said, "My goodness, you're a stupid guy because our family is poor. you have no medical ancestors in that sense. So you're going to begin from zero. And as a poor family, you're going to be discriminated at the medical school. I said, doesn't matter. I'll do it. He wanted me to be an engineer or lawyer because at that time, those professions would bring some kind of social growing for the family in a sense. And he was right in that sense. But because at medical school, I only met mostly people from a higher social status. But it was not a problem, really. I think I'm a little bit idiot because, in a sense, I never perceived if there was prejudice because of anything. I really didn't pay attention to it. I think that's an effect of that early childhood.
Oh. I think you froze on me. I hope you come back. Oh,
yeah.
You came back.
I came back?
Yes.
Thank God. But what happened, maybe that early childhood experience of being so much with myself helped me. And
oh, I lost you again.
I was much loved by my mother. You lost me?
You came back. You came back.
I came back. Okay, there's some kind of, because it's windy here, maybe I don't know. But then my mom loved me. I thought I was wonderful. So if people treated or tried to be prejudiced against me, and I didn't even perceive it.
Yeah.
And I became a doctor.
You were immunized by her love against the social constructions around you.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
She was very successful.
So you did medicine, but then when did you enter anthropology?
What happened is that when I finished my residency in psychiatry, I felt like I was married, and my first wife, she was going to do those examinations for university. So I began studying with her to help her have the motivation. And so I entered the faculty of philosophy. I went to study philosophy. At a certain point, she went to what we call in Portuguese letras. That would be letters, but I'm not sure. It's something about studying language and Portuguese and literature, something like that. And I went to philosophy. And then after philosophy, I wanted to do a master, but I didn't want to do a master in psychiatry because I said, it's enough of studying that. I already work with it, but I don't want to be more of the same. And so I went to I saw a newspaper with an advertisement of a master program in social anthropology in the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro, a very good program. And I went there, and they said, "Oh, but you're a psychiatrist. What are you doing here?" I said, "Yeah, I don't want to be a master in psychiatry. I want to be a master in social anthropology. Is that a problem for you?" I was very stupid in that sense, because those were very famous professors of social anthropology, Gilberto Velho and others. And then they looked one another. They said, "Well, maybe he's right. What's the problem? If he's a doctor, he studied philosophy, he can be here." Okay. And I passed the examinations and everything else. But I was interested really in understanding mainly where I come from because of my mixed origin. Right. I knew something about some family stories, but I wanted to know more about Brazil, about the society we live there, about this mixing of indigenous peoples, people who were abducted from Africa and really hijacked from Africa and brought forcibly to Brazil. And so all this together made a very mixed population because we are not really, although there's a lot of prejudice and racism and everything, but it didn't prevent this mixing of people. So people really didn't.
It did.
So we have a very mysterious situation in Brazil that depending on your social status, your race, I know this term is horrible, but anyway, it's a term that you use, your race is not so important if you have the right social status. I mean, people will whiten you if you're a doctor, for example, like me. As I told that day, I only discovered that I was a person of color when I came to the United States.
Yes, I remember you. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, I was walking here in Santa Fe, walking around. Then a guy in a car, very fancy car, he opened the window and started speaking Spanish with me. No problem. I like Spanish and I can understand it. But it sounded me strange. Why didn't he say anything in English? Why he chose Spanish? And then I didn't know why, but I felt somewhat angry and I answered in English. I don't speak that language, which was not true, but I didn't like the way it happened, you see? And then after he began speaking,
come back.
With surprise in English. Hello?
Yeah, you went away for a little bit.
Yeah, as he began talking, after he went away, and then I perceived that because of my color and aspect, he put me in some kind of category. And I felt strange, really. And then I began thinking about in those terms too, in terms of race and color. Because in Brazil, the process is meant to make you forget these things.
Right.
Because the idea that was, the propaganda was, oh, we are a perfectly integrated society, you see? And it's like a brainwash that you have since you're a child. Because when I was a child, they taught me that the indigenous peoples had disappeared like that. The African were slaves. Because of the indigenous peoples were disappearing, they had to bring the Africans. And then someday slavery was ended. It was really in 1888. And then
a faction of it was ended, right? And then the neo slavery began.
Yeah, but that was not taught to us at school. And it took me a long time to learn that from my life and from my experiences. You know, when I entered medical school, one of my second day there was in anatomy class. And in the anatomy class, we had to dissect corpses. And all the corpses were of colored people. Yeah. There was no white there. Not even one to say, my goodness, there's a white person here. Right. And so I began thinking, well, only colored people here. So, and then I discovered that in public hospitals, most of the people were colored, the patients. Right. And so you begin to think, what is happening? Most of the doctors are really white.
So you began to see the social structure, how it's closing. So how then, I want to bring you to that point. So you went through medicine, general medicine, psychiatry, anthropology, and then how did you land in the Zen Buddhism?
That's a good story. But, you know, my family was very religious. As I told you, my father was a priest, right, and my mother was Catholic, but the way Brazilian people are Catholic, which is really not.
What will you say about the Brazilian way of being Catholic?
Very orthodox, but I don't know the word in English. Rezadeira. And so my mother was from a lineage of rezadeiras, those women that would pray,
praying,
touching you with herbs or things like that, making signs. and so that would protect you. So that's not really Orthodox Catholicism. It's more a mix of indigenous things with Catholicism.
Yeah.
So my family was very religious in that sense, and I grew up a very religious person, but I was curious, and they never interfered with my curiosity. So I had friends who were like Presbyterians. I went to Sunday school with them to see how did they study the Bible. I was 12 at that time. And I was lucky because the pastor was a very progressive man. So he was so progressive that 2 or 3 years later, he was expelled from the congregation. But I was really lucky because he had a vision, a very open vision of the Bible and Protestantism. But then I went to Rosicrucian studies and meditations and everything like that.
There was a thirst for learning that was always guiding you.
Yeah, the spiritual thing. But when I was 13, there was one of those very cheap books. You know, in Brazil, we had books that were made with newspaper paper. Yeah. And they were like pocket books and very, very cheap. So when I went back from school to home, I usually bought some about philosophy or religion. And then I bought one about Buddhism. I was marveled, but I couldn't find any Buddhists around and no Buddhist center. And later I learned that there weren't really. The first was when I was around 20, but I didn't meet them. Anyway, what happened is that I always wanted, but I began meditation in the Rosicrucian way, then in yoga, things like that. But I always had that feeling that Zen was something that I wanted to know. So when I was like 33, I managed to get a scholarship in Japan for medicine for 3 months, for a 3-month stay. But then what I wanted really was to go to a Zen temple.
You escaped to the monastery.
Yeah. So in the morning, I would be on my medical activity in Japan, but in the evening, late evening, I would go to a temple that I discovered that the priest would speak German. The only priest who could speak any Western language that I found spoke German. I could speak German, surprisingly, because I went to learn German because I wanted to read Freud in the original language. Yeah, it's a little bit crazy. But then I met a Zen priest in Japan who spoke German. You see, things are really, I don't believe in coincidence.
They fall into place, right? Things.
Yeah. And so this guy was extremely kind with me, and he taught me the first things about Zen, and I stayed all the time going there. Finally, we became friends. He called me to have dinner, he invited me to know his family. And very interestingly, like 2 years before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, one of my patients went to Japan. I said, "Oh, please take this gift for this in this temple. He must be there." And then he met the son of this guy, was the priest. This guy is now a top rank priest in the Rinzai Zen order. So it was very interesting. And then I came back to Brazil with this first training, and then he United States from New York, from a Zen center. The guy said he was a friend of my teacher in Japan, and that he understood that I wanted to continue, but I wouldn't be able to go back to Japan. So he invited me to go to New York. I went. And then I always accept things. You know, some people think that it's like planning, that I had planned to be a Zen priest and have a career in Zen. Never happened that way. And when the guy in New York said, "Just come here January 6th, 3 p.m., I was there. I didn't care. I mean, I never discussed it with this kind of spiritual thing that happened with me. So, and then finally, after 3 or 4 years, there was a Japanese missionary in Rio de Janeiro, and I began really a daily practice with him. And then someday he told me, "Oh, now it's time for you to take vows." I said, "Okay." And then 2 years later, he said, "Oh, now it's time for you to become a priest." I said, "Okay."
You say it like that, but it's a lot of work and a lot of curiosity that has led you to those
Yeah, but
opportunities.
something, Marianela, it's I'm very respectful of the spiritual world. I really do believe in it. And I continue to practice my native religion. I mean, it's not that I changed to Zen. And that's a good thing about Zen, because you don't have to
Right,
convert.
like you don't have to give up. You don't have to
Yeah, I
give
don't
up
have to
who
give
you
up
are.
everything. Yeah. So I still practice them. I have my terreiro, the place of practice, with the priest who is my, we call Pai de Santo, the saint's father, but he's my priest. And so there I'm nothing. I mean, the fact that I'm a teacher in Zen doesn't give me a better
Well, it gets enriched, right? It gets
situation.
enriched, all
Yeah,
these experiences and the intersectionality in your life, all these
yeah.
lines.
But I'm very respectful of mystical, spiritual, honest thing. So when I had to like bow here and put my head on the ground, I could do it very easily. I know that Westerners sometimes have problems with bowing to the ground. But I used to that since I was 5. I was bowing to the ground on my native religion place. I was bowing to the spirits. I took like blessings from the spirits. I took the hand of the priest and would kiss and ask for his blessing. So sometimes Zen is even a bit too arid for me. I would like more music, like they do in Brazil for candomblé with the drums and everything. It's okay. We have to. Each practice has its own way of being. But I'm really respectful of all of it, and I think that, as you said, it only enriches my life and helps me through difficult situations, because I never feel really alone in that sense. My world is full of ancestors and spirits. So I think they're always protecting me. Some people may think this is just kind of wishful thinking, but I don't feel it that way.
It happens. That interdependence is real for us. So I know one of the offerings that you do in your work in Brazil is the contemplative care. Is that something, how long have you been doing that? And is that how your path cross Roshi John Halifax?
Yeah, exactly. Because as many things in my life, I mean, it's another thing that I didn't plan. I was working as a psychiatrist in the public health system of Brazil, and I worked in an outpatient clinic. And someday they just removed me to a hospital, general hospital, where they need a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists usually don't like to work in general hospitals. So that's why they were needing one.
Yeah.
Because people didn't, the only place that there was in that hospital that didn't have a psychiatrist.
So you went to a general hospital?
It was the oncology ward. Yeah, and then I loved the work there. I learned a lot. At that time, there were no like specialization courses in palliative care in Brazil, so I learned it on the place, on the experience. And I work mostly with psychiatric palliative care. But also, what happens that through that work and being together with dying people, one day a friend of mine went to a congress in Vancouver and brought me Roche's book, Being with Dying, as a gift, because he said, "Oh, you like this kind of thing, you and those strange people who like to work with dying." I said, "Yeah, I'm sort of strange, but my beliefs. So the world is full of spirits. It's just a question of time. All of us will be on the other side sometime. So why not just be there with people and be a witness to their passing and be there for them? I cannot avoid that. That's not the idea, but I can make it a more humane experience. I mean, nobody should die alone in that sense. I don't think that's right. And COVID made it very bad. But anyway, what happened is that I began reading the book. At that time, my wife was a psychologist, and she worked also with death and dying, and we began using the book. And then she was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer, and she lived 9 months. And we had a very, how would you say? I would say a very enriching experience. Maybe it's strange to talk about that when you talk about someone that you love dying.
Right, but I can see how the being close to the dying process.
Yeah.
I don't want to say prepared you, but it did in a way, right?
Yeah, at least we were like open to the experience.
Right.
I mean, and we could really share it with our family. And I think that everybody grew and got more mature with that experience. And she died, I would say, beautifully. But before dying, she said, "Why don't you go to New Mexico?" I said, "Oh, it's just over there, né? From Rio de Janeiro." She said, "Don't be so grumpy. Just go there and say thank you to that remarkable woman. She helped us so much." And I said, "Okay." And then I came to Santa Fe, to Paya. It was 2012. She died in 2011.
So you came after she died?
Yeah, she died in August 31st, 2011, and I came for the Being with Dying seminar that was next year, 2012, in May or April. I think it was in May. And then I told Joan the story. She was very moved. It still moves me. And then our friendship and my studying with her began. So it was, you see, so interesting life, no? Words bring us, they can separate, but they can bring us together too. I mean, her book really made my life and my family's life much more enriched by that situation. And then the book brought me here. So words are really powerful.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, things are mysteriously connected. This concept of reciprocity is real.
It's
real. So when you think about your work with Roshi, John, what is the most salient experience that you have had in working with her in this path of being with dying?
I would say fierce love, fierce hope. She's like Rebecca Solnit says, wise hope, not the hope that something magical will happen, though it can happen, but that's not the hope to which I'm referring. I mean, it's a hope of someone who shows up for life. She's very direct and loving care, but I would say fierce because she's there and she looks you in the eyes.
And she'll name what needs to be named.
Yeah. Now that we are talking, I'm thinking about that. Maybe she reminds me of my father. It's interesting because she's a priestess. I don't know how do you say that in English. And but also her words are very powerful because she embodies her words. It's not like saying empty words. And she teaches the Dharma daily with her actions. So I think that's nowadays I'm getting a bit like I don't like too much when people begin teaching the Dharma with too many words. It begins to sort of irritates me because I think the Dharma is not to be taught with so many words. I mean, those words have to be accompanied by definite actions, actions that may make this world a little bit better for everybody, not just for a minority.
Right. And if we look at your life, that's what you have been able to do to integrate the Dharma into what is meant to be, which is action, right?
Yeah. And I write books. So something that's very interesting is that I don't think I'm a writer, really, in that sense that people are like writers like Fernando Pessoa, who's a poet so big, or T.S. Eliot. But because I still write as I'm writing my diaries, you see? And I share what I feel, the situations. And my last book, my newest book, is about this period of time that my wife was dying, what was happening, because she wanted me to record some of our conversations. I said, okay, you think I'm going to write a book about that later? She said, okay. I said, it will take some time. It took really 10 years because it was full of emotions and feelings. So it was not just sitting there. But one thing that I did was writing all those, during those 10 years, everything I felt and saw, I wrote. And then I combined it with some, not theoretical, but some things about more theoretical, about grieving and dealing with it. But then I mixed everything and made a book. And so
and the book is now available in...
It will be from October 16 on in Portuguese.
Okay. And then we're going to translate it into English and Spanish.
Oh, thank you. That's a good idea. I would love to see it.
Right.
You know, my present wife, she's a palliative care doctor, and her book was translated already into English. Death is a Day Worth Living. So I'm making some marketing of her book in your podcast, sorry.
That's okay. It's a beautiful book. I took a pic. So it's wonderful. So when, as I asked you these questions in closing, when you look back in retrospectively at your life, what is the most satisfying thing that you can experience or see about your life? All these intersecting lines.
I'm so grateful. I have 3 daughters, 38, 40, 42, that are so beautiful inside and outside. I'm so grateful for having them in my life. And one granddaughter that is 9, one grandson that is now going to be born in February. And, what I feel is that life is magical.
Definitely. There is magic everywhere. We just need to...
And of my heritage, my ancestry. I mean, the original peoples here, they never thought of coincidence. They thought that everything was interconnected.
Yes.
Interdependent, without using that word. The only sentence that I could remember in the language of my ancestors was a sentence that was passed from my grandmother to my mother. And then when I met my relatives during the pandemic, because they were passing by some problem, and I met them in the internet, this nation, Funio, I asked, is this really your language? And I repeated it like, and she said, oh yeah, it means the animals are our brothers. We are together.
Oh, beautiful. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat the
That's a very difficult language for me because, and this is the only phrase I know, because the other day, finally I met them, one of the shamans of this group, this nation. I brought him to Rio, and he made some rituals in our Zen temple there, in the original language.
So beautiful.
It was wonderful. I'm gonna send you the film that we made there. You're gonna love it.
But that's the truth that we have forgotten, right? That we are really interrelated, that we are interconnected, that there is this vincularidad that's always running through us, no matter where we go or what iteration of a persona we come up with. It's always there.
And that story that we were told that the indigenous peoples were dead is not really true.
It is not true.
The thing is that they wanted us to stay on the forest, like in the jungle, naked, and okay, those are indigenous peoples. But if you're a doctor, you live in the city, no, you're not indigenous. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of thing that was put in our heads and minds, at least in Brazil, and I think in many places is the same.
But then that, I mean, when I was listening to your talk at Upaya, I told you, right, like my heart was beating so fast because I was really connecting to what you were saying, and this knowing that I have that people don't disappear, that, you know, the biggest lie we have been told is about these indigenous communities as being extinct. Like, how can a people be extinct? We shape shift, we move, we transform, but the essence is always there, and you embody that.
Yeah, and they forbade us to speak our languages. In the 19th century, the indigenous languages were forbidden in Brazil because until then they were spoken.
Exactly.
And so, many are alive today, more than 250. And so I think they tried to make us believe that we were extinct.
Yes, but we didn't believe that.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah.
So thank you so much for engaging me in conversation, and I do hope that we'll have another conversation later on. I like having people back and kind of taking where we left it.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so pleasant to be here with you.
Yeah,
Muchas
I know
gracias.
you're gonna be traveling, but when you're back in Brazil, maybe.
Yeah, I'll be traveling. I'll stay in Upaya until October 1st, and then I go to Europe to visit, to meet my wife and daughter and stepdaughter and everything.
Good.
And then we go back to Brazil. But I'm gonna send you. Then we'll make contact through email. Send me your address. I'm gonna send you a book.
All right. Thank you, Alcio.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to What a Word is Worth. You can access different versions of today's interview at Anchor, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you are interested and want to hear more about this, just hit the subscribe button in the podcast app. And also, if you found this program beneficial, leave us a review. I am with you in love and compassion always, always, always.